So now I'm going to turn it over to Paul Locke, who's going to talk about MassDEP's forthcoming activity on a proposed cleanup standard for groundwater and for soil under our wayside cleanup rules.
And while Paul's coming up, we've had another member join us. Would you like to just introduce yourself?
Yes, sorry, I'm Mareo. I am the drinking water advocate for Clean Water Action.
Welcome.
Glad to have you, Maria.
I'm going to stand here for a second because the person running the video camera has abandoned their post. They can't see me. In the very near future, we are in our wayside cleanup program, which governs the notification, assessment, and cleanup and closure of hazardous waste sites in Massachusetts. We have a large rate package that's about to go public, and in amongst that is a proposal to establish reportable concentrations for PFAS compounds and cleanup standards in soil and groundwater for PFAS. The notification requirements are key to us because at the moment, without specific numbers that require notification to DEP, the process of assessment and cleanup doesn't necessarily begin. We've had a number of cases, as Doug had mentioned, where detection in water supplies has led to site and source discovery for wayside cleanup, and then we also not only try to identify the source, but look for other private wells in the area that may be contaminated. There are also cases, one being in Martha's Vineyard, where work done at a facility, because of guidance that we've already put out, saying that there are certain activities associated with the use of AFFF or use of PFAS compounds, and if you were doing waste site cleanup assessment activities in or around those kind of locations, then PFAS compounds should be a contaminant of concern, and you should begin looking for it. It's part of this. It should become part of the standard procedure. And in Martha's Vineyard, the licensed site professional and the parties conducting the activities recognized that this was an area that had potential for PFAS contamination. They sampled for it, they found it, and they're now working on the assessment and eventual cleanup of the source and also addressing the contaminated private wells in the area. That's the way that the wayside cleanup assessment notification process works. That's the way it should work. It will be a lot smoother and a lot clearer if we have notification criteria in place, published in regulations, which is what most people work off of. So the RCs in both soil and groundwater are important for us. And at the back end, for closing out sites, determining what poses a significant risk, at what point can somebody achieve a permanent solution for a contaminated property. The Method 1 standards are standards in soil and groundwater. There are 3 categories for each, and we also look at potential for soil to leach to groundwater and exceed the groundwater standards. And so people have the opportunity to use these standards to help close out the sites. There's also a site-specific risk assessment process as well that can be used, which would use kind of standard risk assessment procedures. But the Method 1 standards, more than 80% of our sites close out using the Method 1 standards. So what will be coming will be these numbers, and among these numbers, the one that is probably most relevant to this group is the GW1 standard. And the GW1 standard applies to groundwater whose current or potential future use is drinking water. So these include areas that are in the Zone 2 of public water supply, that are proximate to a public water supply if there's not a Zone 2, an integral wellhead protection area. These are areas that are proximate to private wells, or in an area where there is no access to public water, if you're more than 500 feet from a public water supply distribution line. It also applies to areas that are being protected for future use as drinking water, areas that are potential drinking water source areas that include potentially productive aquifers, area where you can pump out enough water out of the ground to in fact support a public water supply. So the GW1 areas are those that are roughly analogous to our drinking water sources, either currently or in the future, and our goal is to be consistent in the wayside cleanup program with the way that the drinking water program looks at what is safe and appropriate for public water supplies. So typically our GW1 standards, where there is an existing standard or guideline, would mirror the drinking water standard or guideline. It would be the same numerical value. With PFAS, trying to coordinate our efforts, the MCP, the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, the cleanup standards will be going out in the very near future for public comment. This will give us an opportunity to put out a number, put out the documentation that's associated with it, and then get public comment, get all of your feedback officially on the record from a wide range of people, both here in Massachusetts, around New England, and I anticipate from further away than that. Partly because of that, we're having a relatively long public comment period of 3 months, well beyond what the minimum requirement. We're having 4 public hearings in the May 20th to 29th area. There'll be additional meetings in the Wayside Cleanup Advisory Committee, a group that gives our program feedback, much like we will be giving the drinking water program feedback. And we will be sharing these comments as they come in with the drinking water program, so that what we hear about the numerical values, the basis of those values, how we looked at PFAS compounds, how we approach the topic as a whole, will be shared with the drinking water program so they can incorporate that into the process that you're all just beginning.
Paul, do you know, I'm sorry,
I was gonna say, will the public hearings be in impacted communities or?
I'm sorry, let's repeat the question, because I understand
I'm sorry.
that for the people watching streaming, it's a little bit hard to hear
Yeah.
the questioners.
Okay. We are having a problem with the audio. Sorry about that. And so the camera has the audio, so if you can all speak to the camera, it would be helpful. We are holding the public hearings in each of the, in the 3 regional offices, so in Springfield, in Worcester, and in Lakeville. And there'll be one here as well, in this room.
do you know which PFAS you'll be proposing GW1s for?
Yes. The question is, do we know which PFAS we will be proposing GW1 standards, in fact, all the notification criteria for? And the answer, and I was being too cute, was yes.
Okay.
They will be coming out. Damon, I believe, will get into in a little bit more detail. There is a process that we follow for all reg processes, and I don't want to get out in front.
I assume, being as you're going to release it April 19th, which you probably know.
Yeah,
It's a week
you
away,
would
right?
you would think. So it will be coming, and the official process will begin at that time. Yes.
Could you explain, you talked about potentially productive aquifers. How do you determine that? Where is that data coming from?
This is
Is it a repeater question?
At my meetings, I usually do. The question is, how do we determine potentially productive aquifers? What kind of criteria? So all of this is in regulation in 310 CMR 40. And potentially productive aquifers, that I'm doing this from memory, are all high and medium yield aquifers in Massachusetts. So it's based on pumping rate. There is a process that we have established for exempting out certain areas based upon development, density, et cetera. Communities had an opportunity to kind of carve out areas from that. So it's a little bit more complicated and detailed than that. But when we came up with the criteria, the point was that we're looking for future potential sources. And we want the cleanup of contaminated sites now to be protective of those in areas where a community might go looking for water.
I know during the sustainable water management process, we had done some mapping of potentially suitable areas for public water supply, and I didn't know if they matched up at all.
I don't
a question
know.
for a different time.
I don't know offhand. We did that in 1993, which
Okay.
kind of predates the
swimming
so
pool.
maybe So,
Paul, I think Todd's got a
a
question.
question, yes.
In regard to cleanup sites, what about the sites that are undergoing cleanup now? Are you going to are you going to apply these standards to them, to those sites that are going under cleanup now?
The question is, for the sites that are undergoing cleanup now, are we going to apply these standards to them? So I would, the way that we typically apply standards and have every time we change or update the MCP standards periodically, probably on average every 4 or 5 years. So this is a well-established process. When we do that, the rules have been that when you close out a site, you have to make sure that you meet the standards and procedures that are in place at the time you do the closure. That's kind of the bottom line rule. So a site that is ongoing work now, if they're able to assess and clean up the property, in the next couple months or so, before these rules are promulgated, then the rules that apply are the rules that are in place right now. And we do not have Method 1 standards now, which means that they would have to go through site-specific risk assessment. And they would be following that process. They also have to meet any applicable super analogous standards that are in place. And so it's a little bit more complicated than just this standard, that closure. But given the complexities of these sites and kind of the progress in the assessment and then ultimately the cleanup, many sites, if not most sites, if not all sites that are currently in the 21 wayside cleanup program will probably not actually close out until after these standards are in place. Yes?
Well, just to follow up on that, the site-specific assessment, is that something that you need to request, or is that automatic?
It is a First, the question was, is the site-specific assessment process by request, or is it automatic? It is always an option for any hazardous waste site cleanup in Massachusetts by regulation. So no specific request has to be made of DEP. Yes?
So just a clarification, from what you said, it seemed as if you will not reopen sites if they are closed off before the new changes are promulgated and finalized.
If a site were to be cleaned up and closed out now, then in that event, in the odds of that, I'm not going to speculate, then it would be done by a site-specific risk assessment. Keep in mind that while we don't have veto power, if you will, or we don't have to allow people to do site-specific risk assessment, we do in fact audit those and review them, and we would be looking at how that assessment was done, what factors were taken into account, or what toxicity values were used for that. So there are a lot of kind of back and forth in that process that would occur. So that at the end of that process, we would probably feel very comfortable about any cleanup that was achieved over in this short period of time.
Andrew Price, Westfield City Council. I just had a question regarding the site cleanup. So do you consider it separate site closeouts for the water and the soil? They're separate, or are you considering all as the same site?
The way... Oh, thank you. It's harder when you're up here. When you hear the question, you're halfway through, you're thinking of the answer. And if we get to repeat the question, which is, when you do the cleanup, is the soil addressed separately from the water? Is it two separate cleanups and closures, or are they all one?
Right.
The cleanup, the site is determined by the extent of contamination, and it would include groundwater and soil and any other media that might be contaminated. So while we do have a provision that allows partial closure to recognize progress that is being made, it's not two separate sites, it's not two separate uses. Yes.
Paul, could you just speak briefly to how the MCP adoption would fit into the federal Superfund sites within the Commonwealth?
The question is, how does the MCP process fit into the federal Superfund site process? Because at least one of these facilities that have PFAS contamination is a federal Superfund site under CERCLA. So I'm going to preface my, because I didn't really expect this much interest in and I love talking about it, but all of you and those watching, if you Google find out about contaminated properties in Massachusetts, it will bring you to a page that has a bunch of different things, including a guide to the waste site cleanup program that gives kind of background on how it works. So that may be useful for any kind of questions in general about how it works. But specifically for CERCLA, we have always been concerned about duplicative regulation and making sure that cleanup at a site, whether it's a CERCLA site, a landfill regulated by the solid waste program, whether it's a record corrective action, where you might have multiple jurisdictions with oversight, we have provisions in our regulations called adequately regulated provisions. 310 CMR 40 points, I'm going to say 0110, but I'm not sure. And those adequately regulated provisions spell out how the two different programs work together. So in the case of the federal Superfund program, US EPA takes the lead on that. We have a role in their process, and we also have specific requirements that still have to be met to meet our process. So our primary work is through our role working with EPA under CERCLA. Within that process, there is a provision for ARARs, applicable, relevant, appropriate requirements, or something like that. That works. And in that ARAR process, which is a circular requirement that you look at ARARs and meet them unless they are specifically waived, state standards are one of the key important ARARs, and specifically state standards. And so this process that we're going through, promulgating the Method 1 standard for the MCP and promulgating the MCL under the drinking water program, is something that is specifically folded into that circular process. All right. Remember that website, Google, find out about a contaminated property in Massachusetts. So we're going to work with the drinking water program. We're going to share everything that we get. We'll share everything, even the non-PFAS stuff. And then we'll go through a process where we finalize those the standards and all the other regulations that we're doing. The public comment period will end July 19th. It starts April 19th. There will be some period of time, and I'm not going to commit to because it's somewhat out of my hands. It depends on what comments we receive. It depends on how complicated any revisions to the regulations have to be. So there will be some period of time where we are considering those comments, and we're thinking about whether changes to the proposal are necessary, not just for PFAS, but for the entire set of regulations. It will be 700 some odd pages. And then we anticipate, after that process, and keeping in mind that this is also during the summer, probably in the fall of 2019, we'll come out with final numbers, final regulations for that. That schedule, of course, is subject to change.
And that would be both the MCL and GW1?
No, this is the GW1 process. The MCL process will, this kicks it off. David will talk more in detail about it. We'll share the information. And just kind of one more thing, kind of off, that we'll be coming out with a GW1 number. Remember I had said that we are committed that our GW1 standards will be consistent with the drinking water program standards. So when we're done with our MCP process, we will then be looking to the MCL development process as it is going on and finishing up. And if necessary, we will then revise our GW1 number to be consistent with any MCL that comes out the back end. So there's a lot of give and take, a lot of program integration, really, will be going on over the next coming months.